when Captain Sarah Chen's own squadron sabotaged her F-16 over hostile territory, forcing her to eject into enemy airspace. She never imagined she'd steal a Russian MiG-29 and use it to save the very pilots who tried to kill her. But that's exactly what happened on a cold Tuesday morning that changed everything. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The maintenance hangar at Ramstein Air Base buzzed with the usual pre-dawn activity, but Sarah felt the familiar weight of isolation settling over her shoulders as she walked past clusters of pilots and ground crew. Their conversations died the moment she approached, replaced by polite nods and forced smiles that never quite reached their eyes. She'd grown accustomed to the treatment over the past 6 months, ever since her transfer to the 86th Fighter Squadron. But it still stung like salt in an open wound. Her flight suit felt heavier than usual as she made her way to Aircraft 847, her assigned F-16 Fighting Falcon. The morning briefing had been typical. Squadron Commander Colonel Matthews outlining their patrol mission over the contested airspace near the Ukrainian border, emphasizing the importance of maintaining formation integrity and following established protocols. Sarah had sat in the back row, taking notes that no one would ever ask to see, preparing for a mission where she'd likely spend 4 hours flying wing position while her squadron mates treated her like an unwelcome passenger. The other pilots called her Chun, the caretaker, behind her back, a reference to her tendency to fly conservative patterns and avoid the aggressive maneuvers that had become standard practice in their unit. What they didn't know, what they refused to acknowledge, was that her conservative flying stemmed from a deep understanding of aircraft limitations and tactical awareness that far exceeded most of their flashy but ultimately reckless approaches. To Air Combat Staff, Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from beneath her aircraft, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. His expression was neutral, professional, but Sarah caught something in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. Guilt, maybe, or concern. He'd been her crew chief for 3 months now, and while he was competent enough, she'd noticed small inconsistencies in his maintenance reports that suggested either carelessness or something more deliberate. "Morning, Captain," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the standard respectful tone required when addressing an officer. "Aircraft's ready for your pre-flight inspection. All systems checked out green during the overnight maintenance cycle." Sarah nodded and began her systematic inspection of the aircraft. She'd learned early in her career that thorough pre-flight checks could mean the difference between coming home safely and becoming a statistic in some accident investigation report. Her hands moved with practiced precision over every surface, checking control surfaces, inspecting weapons pylons, examining the intake and exhaust systems for any signs of damage or foreign object debris. The F-16 was a beautiful machine, sleek and purposeful in a way that never failed to stir something deep in her chest. She'd been flying fighters for 8 years now, accumulating over 2,000 flight hours across 3 different aircraft types, but the Fighting Falcon remained her favorite. It was responsive, forgiving when it needed to be, and capable of incredible performance when pushed to its limits. Major Blake Stevens approached from across the flight line, his squadron patch catching the early morning light. Stevens was everything the Air Force wanted in a fighter pilot: tall, confident, with the kind of natural charisma that made junior officers want to follow him into combat. He was also the most vocal critic of Sarah's flying style, often making comments during debriefs about her overly cautious approach to tactical situations. "Ready for another exciting patrol, Chun?" Stevens asked, his tone carrying the subtle condescension she'd grown to expect. "Try to keep up today. We might actually see some action, and I'd hate for you to get left behind." Sarah finished her inspection of the starboard wing and turned to face him. "Aircraft's ready, sir. I'll maintain assigned position and follow all brief procedures." Stevens studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. You know, Chen, sometimes I wonder if you're really cut out for this kind of work. Fighter aviation requires a certain aggressiveness, a willingness to take calculated risks. Some people just don't have that killer instinct. The comment was designed to provoke a reaction, to get her to defend herself or argue about her capabilities. Sarah had learned not to take the bait. Instead, she simply nodded and continued her pre-flight inspection, checking the aircraft's external fuel tanks and weapon systems with methodical thoroughness. 20 minutes later, she was strapped into the cockpit, running through her startup procedures while the rest of the squadron prepared for takeoff. The radio chatter was light, mostly routine communications between pilots and ground control, but Sarah detected an undercurrent of tension that seemed unusual for a standard patrol mission. Falcon Flight, this is Tower, the air traffic controllers. Voice crackled through her headset. You're cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Weather is clear, winds light and variable. Have a safe flight. The formation takeoff was smooth. 4 F-16s lifting into the gray German sky in perfect formation. Sarah flew the number 4 position, maintaining precise spacing behind and to the right of Stephen's aircraft. The morning sun painted the landscape below in shades of gold and amber, and for a few minutes she allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of flight. It wasn't until they reached their assigned patrol altitude that Sarah began to notice the first signs that something was wrong. Her engine temperature readings were climbing slightly, not enough to trigger warning lights, but enough to indicate that something in the cooling system wasn't functioning optimally. She made a mental note to mention it during the post-flight debriefing, assuming they could trace the problem to a faulty sensor or minor maintenance issue. The patrol route took them along the edge of contested airspace, a corridor that had seen increasing military activity over the past several months. Intelligence reports suggested that Russian aircraft had been probing NATO defenses in the region, testing response times and gathering electronic intelligence on radar and communication systems. It was exactly the kind of mission that required experienced pilots with steady nerves and sound judgment. Sarah monitored her instruments with the focused attention of someone who genuinely understood what each gauge and indicator meant. Her training had emphasized the importance of systems knowledge, and she'd spent countless hours studying technical manuals and maintenance procedures that most pilots considered beneath their notice. That knowledge was about to become more important than she could possibly imagine. The first indication of serious trouble came 30 minutes into the patrol. Her oil pressure gauge began fluctuating erratically, jumping from normal readings to dangerously low levels and back again. Sarah keyed her radio to report the anomaly, but before she could speak, Stephen's voice filled her headset. Falcon 4, we're showing some irregularities in your engine parameters on our data link. Recommend you abort the mission and return to base for maintenance inspection. The suggestion made tactical sense, but something about Stephen's tone bothered her. There was no surprise in his voice, no concern for her safety, just a matter-of-fact recommendation that sounded almost rehearsed. Sarah glanced at her engine instruments again, noting that while the readings were abnormal, they weren't yet critical. Falcon Lead, I'm showing elevated temperatures and fluctuating oil pressure, but the aircraft is still flyable. Request permission to continue the mission. -4, RTB immediately. We'll complete the patrol with 3 aircraft. As Sarah banked her F-16 toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The engine problems had developed too suddenly, too conveniently, almost as if someone had wanted her out of the formation. But that was paranoid thinking, wasn't it? Her squadron mates might not respect her abilities, but they wouldn't actually sabotage her aircraft. That would be crossing a line from professional rivalry into something much darker and more dangerous. She was about to learn just how wrong that assumption was. The flight back to Ramstein should have taken 45 minutes, but Sarah's engine troubles were worsening with each passing mile. The oil pressure warnings had evolved from intermittent fluctuations to steady amber caution lights, and her exhaust gas temperature was climbing into the yellow zone. She reduced power settings and adjusted her flight profile to minimize stress on the failing systems. But deep in her gut, she knew this wasn't a random mechanical failure. As she nursed the crippled F-16 through German airspace, Sarah's mind drifted back to the incident that had destroyed her reputation and landed her in the 86th Fighter Squadron's doghouse. It had been 8 months ago, during a close air support mission over Syria, when everything she thought she knew about loyalty and brotherhood had crumbled around her. Captain Marcus Webb had been her flight lead that day, a pilot with 15 years of experience and a chest full of combat ribbons that spoke to his skill and dedication. Sarah had looked up to Webb, respected his tactical knowledge and his ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. When he'd ordered their two-ship formation to engage a convoy of vehicles moving through a narrow mountain pass, she'd followed without question. The target package had seemed straightforward enough. 8 vehicles identified as enemy combatants transporting weapons and supplies to insurgent forces. Webb had rolled in first, his bombs impacting precisely on the lead and trailing vehicles, effectively trapping the convoy in the killing zone. Sarah's job was to follow up with a second pass, eliminating the remaining vehicles with surgical precision. But as she'd lined up for her attack run, something had felt wrong. The vehicles weren't returning fire, weren't taking evasive action, weren't displaying any of the tactical behaviors she'd been trained to expect from enemy combatants. Instead, she'd seen people running from the burning vehicles, and in that split second of decision, her training and instincts had collided with a terrible realization. "Panther lead, Panther 2, she'd transmitted, her voice tight with sudden uncertainty. "I'm seeing civilian behavior patterns down there. Request confirmation of target identification." Webb's response had been immediate and harsh. "Panther 2, you are cleared hot. Engage the target as briefed. Execute immediately." But Sarah had seen something that would haunt her for months afterward. A small figure, clearly a child, stumbling away from one of the burning vehicles in that moment. All the intelligence briefings and targeting data in the world couldn't override what her eyes were telling her. "Negative lead, I'm waving off. There are civilians in the target area." The radio silence that followed had lasted exactly 3 seconds before Webb's voice erupted in fury. "Panther 2, you will engage that target immediately. That is a direct order." Sarah had pulled her aircraft into a steep climb, refusing to drop her ordnance on what she was now certain was a civilian convoy. Later investigation would prove her right. The vehicles had been carrying displaced families fleeing from combat zones, not weapons and insurgents. The intelligence had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, and her refusal to blindly follow orders had prevented a massacre, but that wasn't how the incident was remembered by her peers. Instead of being recognized for preventing a war crime, Sarah had been labeled as insubordinate, unreliable, and lacking the killer instinct necessary for combat operations. Webb had written a scathing report describing her hesitation as dangerous and unprofessional, arguing that her failure to follow orders could have compromised the mission and endangered American lives. The subsequent investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, even commending her judgment and restraint under pressure. But by then, the damage to her reputation was irreversible. Word had spread through the tight-knit fighter pilot community that Sarah Chen couldn't be trusted to pull the trigger when it mattered. She was soft, they whispered. She overthought situations. She didn't have what it took to make the hard decisions in combat. The transfer to the 86th Fighter Squadron had been presented as a lateral move, an opportunity to gain experience in a different theater of operations. But Sarah knew the truth. She was being shuffled aside, placed in a unit where her supposed inability to follow orders couldn't compromise more important missions. The 86th was where pilots went to finish out their careers quietly, flying routine. Patrols and training exercises that kept them out of the way of more aggressive operators. Major Stevens had made his opinion clear from the moment she'd arrived at Ramstein. During her first squadron meeting, he'd introduced her as Captain Chen, who's joining us from the Middle East theater, with an emphasis that made it clear he knew exactly why she'd been transferred. The other pilots had picked up on the subtext, immediately treating her with the kind of polite distance reserved for someone who couldn't be counted on when things got difficult. What made it worse was that Sarah knew she was a better pilot than most of them. Her technical knowledge was superior, her understanding of aircraft systems more comprehensive, and her tactical awareness sharper than pilots with twice her experience. But none of that mattered when your reputation was built on a single moment of moral courage that had been reinterpreted as professional cowardice. The irony was that Webb had been quietly relieved of command 6 months after the Syria incident, when follow-up investigations revealed a pattern of aggressive tactics that bordered on reckless endangerment. But by then, Sarah's transfer was complete, and the fighter-pilot community had already moved on to other gossip and controversies. Her vindication had been buried in classified reports that most pilots would never see. Now, as her FIS-16's engine continued to deteriorate over German farmland, Sarah wondered if her isolation in the squadron had made her a target for something more sinister than professional ostracism. The timing of the mechanical failure seemed too convenient, occurring just as they entered the most sensitive portion of their patrol route. And Stevens' quick suggestion that she abort the mission had felt rehearsed, as if he'd been expecting exactly this kind of problem. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Ramstein Tower. Falcon 4, we're tracking your emergency transponder. State your current status and fuel remaining. Sarah glanced at her fuel gauge, noting that her consumption rate was higher than normal due to the engine problems. Tower, Falcon 4 has approximately 30 minutes of fuel remaining. Engine is running rough with multiple caution lights. Requesting priority handling for emergency landing. Roger, Falcon 4. You're cleared direct to Ramstein, runway 27. Emergency equipment is standing by. As she began her descent toward the airbase, Sarah caught sight of movement on her starboard side. 3 aircraft were approaching from the east, flying in a tight formation that immediately triggered her tactical training. The silhouettes were wrong for friendly aircraft, too angular, with swept wings and twin vertical stabilizers that marked them as Russian-built fighters. Her heart rate spiked as she realized what she was seeing: 3 MiG-29 Fulcrums, flying deep into NATO airspace with apparent impunity. They were less than 50 miles from Ramstein Air Base, well inside the defensive perimeter that should have detected and intercepted them. Long before they reached this position, Sarah keyed her radio to report the contact, but before she could speak, her engine finally surrendered to whatever damage had been inflicted on it. The F-16 shuddered violently as power output dropped to 0, leaving her with a 30,000-pound glider and rapidly diminishing options for survival. MiG formation had spotted her, she realized, as all 3 aircraft banked in her direction. Whether they intended to escort her down or eliminate a witness to their presence, Sarah would never know. Her aircraft was dying beneath her, and the ground was rushing up with terrifying speed. Time slowed as she reached for the ejection handles, her mind already calculating the odds of survival in hostile territory, with enemy fighters circling overhead like vultures. The ejection sequence felt like being hit by a freight train traveling at supersonic speed. Sarah's body compressed against the seat as explosive charges fired her clear of the dying F-16, the sudden deceleration forcing blood from her extremities and blurring her vision. The automatic separation system worked perfectly, deploying her parachute at optimal altitude, while her aircraft continued its death spiral toward the forested hills below. Suspended beneath the olive-drab canopy, Sarah had precious few seconds to assess her situation before the 3 MiG-29s completed their intercept. The lead aircraft passed less than 200 meters away, close enough for her to see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. Instead of the aggressive maneuvering she'd expected, the Russian formation maintained a stable orbit around her position, almost as if they were providing protective coverage rather than preparing for an attack. Her radio headset had survived the ejection, and she could hear frantic communications from Ramstein Tower, trying to establish contact with her squadron. But what she heard next made her blood run cold with understanding. "Tower, this is Falcon Lead." Stephen's voice crackled through the static. "Falcon 4 appears to have suffered complete engine failure. We lost contact during her emergency descent. No visual confirmation of ejection." The lie was delivered with professional calm, but Sarah knew exactly what it meant. Stevens was reporting her as missing, possibly dead, while she was very much alive and listening to every word. More disturbing was his claim about losing contact. Her radio was functioning perfectly, and her emergency beacon should have been transmitting her exact position to any aircraft within 50 miles. "Falcon Lead, are you able to search the crash site?" Tower responded. "Negative, Tower. We're showing multiple bogey contacts in the area. Recommend we clear the airspace and let search and rescue handle recovery operations." Sarah's parachute carried her toward a dense stand of pine trees, and she prepared for a hard landing by pulling her knees up and keeping her feet together. The impact drove the breath from her lungs as she crashed through the upper branches before finally coming to rest in a tangle of nylon and pine needles. Her survival training kicked in immediately. Release the harness, gather the chute, find cover, assess injuries, establish communications. But as she worked to free herself from the parachute lines, she heard something that stopped her cold: the distinctive whine of jet engines at low altitude, followed by the unmistakable sound of cannon fire. One of the MiGs was strafing her crash site, systematically destroying any evidence that she had survived the ejection. Sarah rolled away from the parachute and pressed herself against the base of a massive pine tree as 30mm rounds chewed through the forest around her. The attack lasted only seconds, but it was thorough and deliberate. When the sound of jet engines faded, she emerged to find her parachute and survival gear reduced to smoking fragments scattered across a 50-meter circle. Someone wanted her dead, and they were willing to use enemy aircraft to accomplish it. Pieces of a conspiracy that had been months in the making suddenly clicked into place with horrible clarity. The maintenance issues with her aircraft hadn't been random failures. They had been carefully orchestrated acts of sabotage designed to force her into this exact situation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's guilty expression made sense now. He had been following orders to compromise her aircraft systems in ways that would manifest as catastrophic failures once she was airborne and alone. Sarah's mind raced through the timeline of recent events, identifying patterns she had been too trusting to recognize. The squadron's gradual isolation of her hadn't been simple hazing or professional rivalry. It had been a systematic campaign to make her disappearance seem unremarkable. Who would question the loss of a pilot who was already considered unreliable and problematic? The Syria incident had been the catalyst, she realized. Her refusal to follow Webb's order hadn't just damaged her reputation. It had marked her as a threat to a network of officers who operated outside the normal chain of command. Webb's aggressive tactics weren't random acts of cowboy behavior. They were part of a coordinated effort to eliminate targets that someone higher up the chain wanted eliminated, regardless of their actual threat status. But Sarah had disrupted that system by refusing to participate in what she recognized as a war crime. Her moral stand had exposed flaws in an operation that depended on unquestioning obedience from pilots who wouldn't ask inconvenient questions about target selection and rules of engagement. When the investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, it had also raised questions about Webb's command decisions and the intelligence that had led to the targeting of civilian refugees. The transfer to the 86th Fighter Squadron hadn't been punishment for insubordination. It had been positioning. For assassination. Stevens and his conspirators had spent months setting up the perfect scenario. A routine patrol mission where her aircraft would suffer mysterious mechanical failure in contested airspace, leaving her vulnerable to attack by enemy forces. The fact that Russian aircraft were involved suggested coordination at levels that reached far beyond simple squadron politics. Sarah's survival. RDIO should have been her lifeline to rescue forces, but when she tried to establish communications, she discovered that the frequency crystals had been damaged during the strafing attack. Whether by accident or design, she was now completely cut off from friendly forces, stranded in hostile territory with no way to call for help. The sound of approaching helicopters forced her deeper into the forest, but these weren't search and rescue aircraft. Through the canopy, she could see the distinctive silhouettes of Russian Mi-24 Hind gunships, flying a search pattern that centered on her crash site. They weren't looking for survivors to rescue. They were hunting for witnesses to eliminate. As Sarah moved through the dense undergrowth, staying ahead of the helicopter search teams, she began to understand the full scope of what she had stumbled into. The routine patrol mission had been cover for something much larger. Something that required the elimination of any pilot who might observe and report activities that violated international law and treaty obligations. The 3 MiGs that had intercepted her hadn't been conducting an unauthorized penetration of NATO airspace. They had been expected, possibly even invited. The conspiracy she had uncovered involved not just American officers, but foreign intelligence services and military units, operating with coordination that could only come from the highest levels of government. Stevens' quick suggestion that she abort the mission made perfect sense now. He had needed her out of the formation before the real purpose of the patrol became apparent. But her aircraft's sabotage had been too successful, forcing her down in an area where she could witness activities that were supposed to remain completely hidden from official oversight. The helicopter search was intensifying, with ground teams being inserted at regular intervals to sweep the forest systematically. Sarah could hear voices calling in accented English, coordinating their movements with military precision. These weren't random insurgents or local militias. They were professional soldiers, operating sophisticated equipment and following carefully planned search protocols. Her survival now depended on staying ahead of the search teams, while finding a way to expose the conspiracy that had led to this moment. But without communications equipment and surrounded by hostile forces, Sarah faced a seemingly impossible challenge: how to survive long enough to reveal the truth about the corruption that had nearly cost her life. The answer to that question was about to present itself in a form she would never have expected. Hidden in a camouflaged revetment less than 2 kilometers from her current position, the camouflaged revetment appeared almost by accident as Sarah worked her way through a particularly dense section of forest, staying parallel to a narrow dirt road that seemed to lead deeper into the hills. She had been following the track for nearly an hour, hoping it might lead to some kind of settlement or communications facility where she could call for help, when the trees suddenly opened into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. What she found there defied everything she thought she knew about the strategic situation in this region. Hidden beneath a sophisticated network of camouflage netting and artificial foliage sat a pristine MiG-29 Fulcrum, its blue-gray paint scheme unmarked by any national insignia or unit markings. The aircraft was clearly operational, with ground power units connected and fuel trucks positioned nearby. More disturbing was the presence of technicians in American flight suits working alongside personnel in Russian uniforms. Their cooperation suggesting a level of coordination that went far beyond anything officially acknowledged by either government. Sarah pressed herself against a massive oak tree, using its trunk as cover while she observed the activity around. The hidden airfield. The installation was larger than it had first appeared. with at least 3 aircraft revetments carved into the hillside and a network of underground bunkers that could house personnel and equipment. This wasn't a temporary forward operating base. It was a permanent facility that had been constructed with significant time and resources. A convoy of vehicles approached along the dirt road, their engines muffled by sophisticated sound dampening systems that made them nearly inaudible until they were almost on top of the position. Sarah counted 6 trucks and 2 command vehicles, all bearing American military markings that looked authentic enough to pass casual inspection. But as the convoy came to a stop near the aircraft revetment, she could see that the personnel who emerged were a mixture of uniforms that represented multiple nations and military services. The operation taking place before her eyes was clearly international in scope, involving coordination between forces that were supposedly adversaries in the current geopolitical climate. Sarah's training in intelligence analysis kicked in as she began cataloging details that could be crucial to understanding what she had discovered. Aircraft tail numbers, personnel movements, equipment configurations, all of it might be important. If she survived long enough to report what she had witnessed, through her position in the tree line, Sarah could see into the nearest bunker complex, where banks of sophisticated communications equipment hummed with activity. Multiple operators sat at workstations, coordinating what appeared to be real-time intelligence gathering and dissemination. Large display screens showed tactical situations across multiple theaters of operation, with data feeds that could only be coming from classified military networks. The scope of the intelligence operation was staggering. Sarah realized she was looking at a joint facility that was intercepting and processing communications from NATO forces, Russian military units, and probably several other national defense establishments. The information being gathered here could compromise operations across multiple continents, potentially costing thousands of lives if it fell into the wrong hands. But who were the wrong hands in this situation? The Americans and Russians working side by side suggested that traditional definitions of friend and enemy had been abandoned in favor of some other agenda that transcended national loyalties. Sarah found herself witnessing what appeared to be a shadow organization that operated outside the normal channels of government oversight and international law. Her radio headset crackled with an unexpected transmission that made her blood freeze. With recognition, Stephen's voice cut through the static. But he wasn't communicating with Ramstein Tower or any other official facility. Instead, he was coordinating directly with the personnel at this hidden installation. Raven Base, this is Falcon Lead. Package delivery was successful. Target is down in Sector 7 Alpha. Cleanup teams should have no difficulty locating and sanitizing the crash site. A Russian accented voice responded immediately. Confirmed, Falcon Lead. Ground teams are in position. No evidence will remain of unauthorized reconnaissance in this area. The conversation continued with technical details about search patterns and evidence disposal that left no doubt about the true purpose of Sarah's mission. She hadn't been sent on a routine patrol. She had been deliberately positioned to witness activities that would justify her elimination as a security threat. The engine failure had been timed to bring her down exactly where ground teams could quickly locate and eliminate her before she could report what she had observed. Sarah's hands shook as the full implications became clear. Her own squadron leader had coordinated her assassination with foreign intelligence services, using American military assets to facilitate what amounted to treason on an international scale. The conspiracy reached far beyond simple corruption or black market weapon sales. This was systematic betrayal of national security that could reshape the global balance of power. A new voice joined the radio conversation, speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to command at the highest levels. Falcon Lead, we have additional complications developing. NATO reconnaissance assets are showing increased activity in your patrol sector. Recommend immediate withdrawal to avoid detection. Copy that, Control. Falcon Flight is RTB at this time. We'll maintain radio silence until debrief. Sarah realized that Stevens and her remaining squadron mates were preparing to return to Ramsden, where they would file reports describing her tragic loss during a routine patrol mission. The official records would show that she had suffered mechanical failure in contested airspace and been shot down by enemy forces before search and rescue operations could be mounted. Her death would be classified as a combat loss, honorable and unfortunate, with no questions asked about the circumstances that had led to her being in that position. But now she knew the truth, and that knowledge made her more dangerous to the conspiracy than they could possibly have anticipated. The intelligence operation she had discovered was worth billions of dollars and countless strategic advantages to whoever was controlling it. Nations would pay enormous sums for the kind of real-time intelligence intercepts she had observed, and the information could be used to manipulate international conflicts in ways that served the interests of the shadow organization rather than any legitimate government. Movement near the aircraft revetment caught her attention as ground crews began preparing the MiG-29 for what appeared to be an immediate departure. Fuel trucks disconnected from the aircraft while technicians completed their final checks of avionics and weapon systems. Whatever mission the unmarked fighter was preparing for, it was happening soon. Sarah's military training told her that she should focus on escape and evasion, working her way through the forest until she could reach friendly territory and report what she had discovered. But her pilot's instincts recognized something else entirely, an opportunity that might never come again. The MiG-29 was a sophisticated multi-role fighter, capable of air-to-air combat and ground attack missions with performance characteristics that matched or exceeded her own F-16. More importantly, it was fully fueled and armed. Sitting less than 200 meters away from her position, with minimal security presence around the aircraft itself. As the ground crews finished their preparations and began moving away from the revetment, Sarah found herself calculating approach routes and escape vectors with the same precision she applied to combat mission planning. The aircraft represented more than just transportation. It was a weapon system that could be used to expose the conspiracy by attacking the very installation where she had discovered it. The moral calculus was complex but ultimately clear. Thousands of lives were at stake if this intelligence operation continued unchecked. Her own government had been compromised at levels that made normal reporting channels unreliable or dangerous. The only way to expose the truth was to take direct action that would be impossible to ignore or suppress. Sarah Chen was about to steal an enemy fighter and use it to attack the people who had tried to kill her. The decision crystallized in Sarah's mind with absolute clarity as she watched the last ground technician walk away from the MiG-29. Every rational instinct screamed that attempting to steal an enemy fighter aircraft was tantamount to suicide. But rationality had become irrelevant the moment her own squadron had tried to murder her. The conspiracy she had uncovered threatened national security on a scale that dwarfed personal survival considerations. Sarah studied the revetment layout with tactical precision, noting sight lines and patrol patterns that would determine her approach route. The aircraft sat approximately 180 meters from her position, separated by open ground that offered minimal concealment. Two sentries walked lazy perimeters around the facility, their attention focused outward toward potential threats from the forest rather than internal security concerns. The MiG-29's cockpit remained open, with a boarding ladder still positioned against the fuselage. Ground power units hummed quietly nearby, maintaining the aircraft's electrical systems in standby mode. Sarah could see weapon pylons loaded with air-to-air missiles and what appeared to be precision-guided ground attack munitions. The fighter was configured for immediate combat operations, requiring only pilot startup procedures to become fully operational. Her approach would have to be swift and silent, timing her movement to coincide with the sentry's patrol cycles. Sarah had memorized their walking patterns during 20 minutes of careful observation. identifying a 40-second window when both guards would be facing away from the aircraft revetment simultaneously. One chance with no margin for error or hesitation. The stolen flight suit she wore would provide minimal camouflage if anyone looked closely, but in the gathering dusk, she might pass casual inspection long enough to reach the cockpit. Sarah's knowledge of Russian aircraft systems was limited but adequate. The MiG-29 shared enough basic flight principles with Western fighters that she could operate it effectively once airborne. As the sentries reached the predetermined points in their patrol routes, Sarah moved. She crossed the open ground in a low sprint, using shadows cast by fuel trucks and equipment trailers to mask her approach. Her boots made soft impacts against the packed earth, barely audible over the ambient noise of generators and ventilation systems throughout the facility. The boarding ladder felt solid beneath her hands as she climbed toward the cockpit with controlled urgency. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but her movements remained precise and deliberate. She had trained for scenarios requiring rapid aircraft acquisition during survival exercises, though those simulations had never involved stealing enemy fighters from international conspiracy installations. The MiG-29's cockpit was laid out differently. From American aircraft, with Cyrillic labels and unfamiliar switch configurations that required careful interpretation. But the fundamental systems were recognizable: engine controls, flight instruments, weapons management panels. Sarah's fingers found the master electrical switch and brought the aircraft systems online with a series of subtle clicks and electronic hums. Engine startup procedures were more complex than she had hoped, requiring navigation through multiple menu systems displayed in Russian text. Sarah worked methodically through the sequence, relying on universal symbols and her understanding of turbine engine principles to guide her through the unfamiliar interface. Precious seconds ticked away as she fought to bring the twin engines to stable idle power. Voices from the ground indicated that her presence had been detected, though the initial response suggested confusion rather than immediate alarm. Someone was calling out questions in Russian, probably wondering why the aircraft was being started without authorization. Sarah didn't have long before confusion transformed into organized resistance. The canopy closed with hydraulic precision. As the engine spooled up to taxi power, Sarah released the parking brake and felt the MiG-29 begin to roll forward under its own power, breaking free from the revetment's concealment. Shouts erupted from multiple directions as ground personnel realized what was happening, but Sarah was already accelerating toward the crude runway that had been carved into the forest clearing. Her radio headset crackled with frantic Russian communications as the base came alive with emergency activity. Sarah could see personnel running toward vehicles and weapons positions, but the MiG-29 was already gaining speed down the improvised airstrip. The fighter's acceleration was impressive, pressing her back into the ejection seat as the twin engines developed full military power. Liftoff came sooner than expected, the aircraft leaping skyward with eager responsiveness that spoke to superior engineering and maintenance. Sarah pulled the gear handle and felt the landing gear retract with solid mechanical authority. Within seconds, she was climbing through 2,000 feet and accelerating toward combat velocity in a stolen enemy fighter. The radio frequencies erupted with coordinated responses as the theft was reported throughout the conspiracy network. Sarah heard Stephen's voice coordinating with Russian ground controllers, their panic evident as they realized that their security had been completely compromised by someone who shouldn't have survived the original assassination attempt. All stations, this is Raven Base. We have unauthorized aircraft departure. Repeat, stolen aircraft is airborne with unknown intentions. Implement immediate containment protocols. Sarah switched to the international emergency frequency and began transmitting in clear English, broadcasting her message on multiple channels simultaneously. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had finally found purpose after months of frustration and betrayal. Any station monitoring this frequency. This is Captain Sarah Chen, United States Air Force. Flying stolen aircraft tail number unknown. I am currently airborne in a Russian MiG-29 after discovering a joint intelligence operation involving treason by American military personnel. This message is being transmitted on guard frequency for recording by all monitoring stations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Multiple air traffic control centers acknowledged her transmission, their voices sharp with disbelief and concern. Sarah continued broadcasting as she maneuvered the stolen fighter toward her intended target, knowing that every word was being recorded by intelligence services across multiple nations. The installation I departed from is located approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Ramstein Air Base. Coordinates to follow. American and Russian personnel are operating joint intelligence gathering equipment in violation of international treaties. My own squadron attempted to assassinate me to prevent discovery of this facility. Ground-based radar systems were painting her aircraft now, trying to establish her identity and intentions. Sarah could see multiple contacts appearing on her threat warning display as interceptor aircraft scrambled from bases across the region. Everyone wanted to know who was flying a Russian fighter through NATO airspace while broadcasting classified information on emergency frequencies. But Sarah's mission was far from complete. The stolen MiG-29 carried enough firepower to destroy the hidden installation completely, eliminating both the intelligence operation and the evidence of international conspiracy. Her targeting systems were already locked onto the coordinates she had memorized, preparing for an attack run that would expose the truth in the most dramatic way possible. The moral weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her shoulders. Like physical force, Sarah was preparing to attack a facility that housed both American and foreign personnel, some of whom might be innocent of the larger conspiracy. But the intelligence operation threatened thousands of lives through the manipulation of international conflicts, and traditional reporting channels had been compromised by the very people she was supposed to trust. Her finger moved toward the weapons release trigger as the hidden installation appeared in her targeting display. Its camouflaged buildings clearly visible through the MiG-29's sophisticated attack systems. Sarah's finger hesitated over the weapons release as her targeting computer locked onto the camouflaged buildings below. Through the MiG-29's heads-up display, she could see heat signatures of personnel moving frantically around the installation, some taking cover while others rushed toward what appeared to be underground bunkers. The moral complexity of the situation struck her with devastating force. She was about to become exactly what her enemies had painted her as, a rogue pilot operating outside legal authority. Before she could complete the attack sequence, her threat warning system erupted with multiple missile lock indicators. 4 F-22 Raptors had materialized from nowhere, their stealth capabilities allowing them to close within engagement range without detection. The lead aircraft's pilot was already transmitting on the emergency frequency, his voice carrying the cold professionalism of someone prepared to shoot down a stolen enemy fighter. Unknown aircraft, this is Viper Flight. You are in violation of international airspace and broadcasting classified information. Reduce power immediately and follow our escort to the nearest military installation for landing and detention. Sarah's tactical display showed the F-22s positioning themselves for optimal firing solutions, their advanced radar systems painting her aircraft with targeting beams that could guide missiles with lethal precision. She was outgunned and outnumbered by pilots flying superior aircraft, but more importantly, she was facing American military personnel who were simply following orders to intercept what appeared to be an enemy threat. Viper Flight, this is Captain Sarah Chen, serial number 774928891. I am a United States Air Force officer flying a captured enemy aircraft. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. I have critical intelligence regarding a conspiracy within our own forces. The lead F-22 pilot's response carried skepticism and barely controlled aggression. Alleged Captain Chen, your claims cannot be verified at this time. Any attempt to deviate from escort instructions will result in immediate engagement. You have 10 seconds to comply with our directives. Sarah realized that her stolen aircraft and unauthorized broadcasts had created exactly the kind of international incident that her enemies could exploit to discredit everything she had discovered. The F-22 pilots were operating under standard rules of engagement, treating her as a hostile threat that had penetrated NATO airspace using enemy equipment. Her own words about conspiracy and treason probably sounded like the desperate lies of a defector or enemy agent. Below her, the hidden installation was rapidly shutting down operations. Sarah could see vehicles evacuating personnel, while others worked to destroy sensitive equipment and documents. The communications bunkers were going dark one by one as operators implemented emergency protocols designed to eliminate evidence of the joint intelligence operation. Within minutes, there would be nothing left to prove that the facility had ever existed. Her radio crackled with Stephen's voice, now transmitting on official channels with authority that came from legitimate command structure. Viper Flight, this is Major Stevens, 86th Fighter Squadron. The pilot you're escorting is Captain Sarah Chen, who suffered psychological breakdown during routine patrol mission. She ejected from her aircraft after reporting mechanical failures and has apparently commandeered enemy equipment. Consider her emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. The clinical language was devastating in its effectiveness. Stevens was using her own survival against her, painting her aircraft theft as evidence of mental instability rather than desperate necessity. His report to the F-22 pilots would become part of the official record, creating a narrative that explained away her accusations while justifying whatever happened to her next. Viper Lead, can you confirm the psychological evaluation? One of the Raptor pilots asked. Affirmative. Captain Chen has been under observation for several months due to concerns about decision-making under pressure. Today's incident appears to confirm our assessment that she requires immediate medical intervention and psychological evaluation. Sarah felt the trap closing around her with systematic precision. Every detail of her months in the 86th Fighter Squadron had been carefully orchestrated to support this exact scenario. Her isolation from other pilots, the gradual undermining of her reputation, even her previous incident in Syria, all of it could be reinterpreted as evidence of progressive mental deterioration rather than moral courage under pressure. Stolen MiG-29 was running low on fuel, forcing her to make immediate decisions about landing options. The F-22s were herding her toward a military airfield, where she would be taken into custody the moment she touched down. Once in military detention, her accusations would be dismissed as the delusions of an unstable officer, while the conspiracy she had uncovered vanished without a trace. Her only hope lay in creating evidence that couldn't be suppressed or explained away, but that required actions that would further confirm her alleged mental instability. Sarah's tactical mind raced through possibilities as she watched the installation below complete its evacuation procedures. Ground vehicles were already disappearing into the forest on roads that probably led to secondary extraction points. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel, Unknown Aircraft. You are approaching bingo fuel, the lead F-22 pilot transmitted. Recommend immediate descent to Spangdalam Air Base for emergency landing. Medical personnel are standing by to provide assistance. The offer sounded reasonable and professional, exactly what any rational pilot would accept under these circumstances. But Sarah knew that accepting escort to Cone, an American base, would end any chance of exposing the conspiracy. She would disappear into the military medical system, where her accusations could be treated as symptoms requiring psychiatric intervention rather than intelligence requiring investigation. Her fuel gauge confirmed the F-22 pilot's assessment. She had perhaps 15 minutes of flight time remaining at current consumption rates. The stolen fighter's fuel system was more efficient than her familiar F-16, but extended combat maneuvering had burned through reserves faster than she had calculated. Soon she would be forced to land whether she wanted to or not, but as Sarah scanned her tactical display for alternatives, she noticed something that changed everything. 3 aircraft approaching from the east, flying information at high speed toward the evacuation area. The electronic signatures matched the MiG-29 she had observed earlier, probably returning from whatever mission had taken them away from the hidden installation. Stevens' voice cut through the radio chatter with sudden urgency. All aircraft, be advised we have additional bogey contacts entering the area. Unknown intentions, recommend caution. Sarah realized that her theft of the 4th MiG-29 had disrupted more than just the intelligence operation. It had compromised an active mission involving Russian aircraft operating in NATO airspace. The returning fighters would find their base evacuated and their cover blown, forcing them to make desperate decisions about their own survival. Her stolen aircraft represented more than transportation or weapons platform. It was the key to understanding a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. But with fuel running low and F-22s forcing her toward inevitable capture, Sarah needed to find a way to preserve the evidence while staying alive long enough to ensure it reached people who could act on it. The solution came to her with crystalline clarity as she watched the approaching MiG formation adjust course toward her position. They weren't returning to base anymore. They were coming to eliminate the witness who had compromised their entire operation. Sarah's fingers moved across the weapons control panel, preparing the stolen fighter for air-to-air combat against aircraft flown by pilots who would show no mercy to someone who had exposed their secrets. The 3 approaching the MiG-29s made their intentions clear when the lead aircraft launched an air-to-air missile without warning or radio communication. Sarah's threat warning system screamed as the weapon tracked toward her position with deadly precision, forcing her into a violent, defensive maneuver that threw her against the cockpit restraints with crushing force. Her stolen fighter responded to the evasive action with crisp authority, but Sarah could feel the fuel situation becoming critical as the engines burned through remaining reserves. During high-G maneuvering, the incoming missile passed close enough to trigger her defensive countermeasures, filling the sky with chaff and flares as she rolled inverted and dove toward the deck. Viper flight, we have active missile engagement. The lead F-22 pilot transmitted, his professional calm cracking slightly. Unknown aircraft are firing on the stolen MiG. Repeat, we have weapons-free environment. The F-22s immediately shifted from escort formation to combat spread, their advanced sensors tracking multiple threats simultaneously. Sarah realized that the Raptor pilots were finally beginning to understand that they had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple aircraft theft by an unstable officer. Stevens' voice cut through the radio chatter with desperate authority. Viper flight, do not engage Russian aircraft. Repeat, do not engage. This appears to be an internal dispute between foreign nationals. Maintain escort duties only. The order was tactically insane and legally questionable, but it carried the weight of command authority that F-22 pilots were trained to obey without question. Sarah watched in horror as the Raptors maintained their defensive positions instead of engaging the hostile aircraft that were actively trying to kill her. A cold second missile launch forced Sarah into another energy-bleeding evasive maneuver, this time barely escaping destruction as the weapon exploded close enough to pepper her aircraft with shrapnel. Multiple warning lights illuminated her instrument panel as systems suffered damage from the near miss. Her stolen MiG-29 was tough and well-built, but it couldn't survive many more close calls. "Any station monitoring this frequency," Sarah transmitted. "On the emergency channel, I am under attack by Russian aircraft operating in NATO airspace. American command personnel are ordering friendly forces not to provide assistance. This confirms the existence of coordinated conspiracy involving foreign intelligence services." Her words were being recorded by multiple agencies across Europe and North America, creating an official record that would be impossible to suppress or explain away. Even if she didn't survive the next few minutes, the truth about the joint operation would be preserved in intelligence archives where investigators could eventually piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. The attacking MiGs had superior numbers and fresher fuel supplies, but Sarah held one critical advantage. She was flying the same aircraft type with identical performance characteristics. Every maneuver they could execute, she could match. Every tactical situation they could create, she could counter with equal skill and determination. As the lead hostile aircraft closed for a gun attack, Sarah reversed into him with a brutal displacement roll that would have been impossible in her familiar F-16. The MiG-29 superior power-to-weight ratio allowed maneuvers that stressed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. Her opponent overshot the firing solution, presenting Sarah with a brief opportunity for offensive action. Her finger found the cannon trigger as her heads-up display painted targeting symbols across the enemy fighter's fuselage. The 30mm gun hammered out a sustained burst that walked tracers through the MiGs' starboard wing and engine intake. Metal fragments sparkled in the afternoon sun as the damaged aircraft rolled away, trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. "Splash one," Sarah announced, with grim satisfaction, but her celebration was premature. The remaining two MiGs had used her engagement with their leader to position themselves for a coordinated attack that would be nearly impossible to defeat. Sarah found herself trapped between converging fighters with insufficient fuel for extended maneuvering. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as both hostile aircraft opened fire simultaneously, forcing Sarah into a defensive spiral that bled airspeed and altitude with each evasive turn. Her fuel warning light had progressed from amber caution to red emergency, indicating that she had perhaps 5 minutes of flight time remaining before flameout forced her to eject over hostile territory. But as the attacking MiGs pressed their advantage, something unexpected happened. One of the F-22 Raptors broke from formation and accelerated toward the engagement area, his pilot apparently deciding that orders could be interpreted flexibly when American aircrew were under direct attack. "Viper 2 is engaging," the Raptor pilot transmitted. "I've got tone on the Southern Bandit." His AIM-120 missile streaked across the sky with hypersonic velocity, intercepting the nearest MiG before its pilot could react to the new threat. The enemy fighter disintegrated in a brilliant fireball that momentarily blinded everyone in the engagement area through their helmet-mounted displays. Stevens' response was immediate and furious. "Viper 2, you are ordered to disengage immediately. You do not have authorization for weapons release against foreign aircraft." "Copy that, Falcon Lead," the F-22 pilot replied with calculated insubordination. "But I've got an American pilot under attack by hostile forces. My rules of engagement are pretty clear about that situation." The remaining MiG pilot found himself facing two aircraft with superior technology and training. His tactical advantage evaporated by the intervention of American forces he hadn't expected to engage. Sarah watched him turn away from the fight, apparently deciding that retreat was preferable to certain destruction. Her fuel situation was now critical beyond any hope of reaching a friendly airfield. The stolen MiG-29's engines were already showing signs of impending flameout as fuel flow dropped below minimum sustainable levels. Sarah had perhaps 2 minutes to find a landing site or prepare for ejection over terrain that might or might not be controlled by friendly forces. "Viper flight, stolen aircraft is declaring fuel emergency," she transmitted. I need immediate vectors to nearest suitable landing site. Aircraft will not remain airborne much longer. The lead F-22 pilot's response carried new respect and concern. Roger that. We're showing Bitburg Air Base at your 2 o'clock, range 30 kilometers. That's your best option for emergency landing. Sarah banked toward the indicated heading. Her engines already beginning to surge as fuel flow became intermittent. Bitburg was a former American installation that had been transferred to German control, but it maintained runways suitable for fighter aircraft and would have crash equipment available for emergency situations. Her radio crackled with transmissions from German air traffic control as they cleared the airspace for her emergency approach. Multiple agencies were coordinating to provide assistance, their professional efficiency a stark contrast to the conspiracy and betrayal that had led to this moment. As Sarah lined up for final approach to Bitburg's main runway, she realized that her survival was no longer the most important consideration. The intelligence she had gathered and the evidence she had created would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command, but only if she could present it to people who had the authority and integrity to act on it. Stolen MiG-29 touched down hard on German concrete, its engines flaming out just as the main gear made contact with the runway. Sarah had literally flown the aircraft to exhaustion, extracting every possible minute of flight time from the fuel that remained in its tanks. As emergency vehicles surrounded her aircraft and German security forces approached with weapons drawn, Sarah began planning how to ensure that the truth about Stevens and his conspirators would reach investigators who could be trusted to pursue justice regardless of political considerations. The German security teams approached Sarah's aircraft with professional caution, their weapons trained on the cockpit, while emergency crews stood ready to respond to any signs of fire or explosion. Sarah raised her hands in clear surrender as she opened the canopy, her movements deliberate and non-threatening despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system from the aerial combat. I am Captain Sarah Chen, United States Air Force. She called out in English, then repeated the identification in her limited German. I am requesting political asylum and protection while providing intelligence information about American military personnel engaged in treasonous activities. The German officers exchanged uncertain glances before their commanding officer stepped forward, his insignia marking him as a Luftwaffeoberst. His English carried only a slight accent as he addressed her with formal courtesy that masked obvious confusion about the unprecedented situation. Captain Chun, I am Colonel Weber. You will remain in the aircraft until we can establish secure communications with appropriate authorities. This incident involves multiple national jurisdictions and requires careful coordination at the diplomatic level. As Sarah waited in the MiG-29's cockpit, she could see the controlled chaos of international crisis management unfolding around the airfield. German military police had cordoned off the entire area while communications specialists worked to establish secure channels with American, NATO, and Russian authorities. The stolen fighter represented potential evidence in what was rapidly becoming a major intelligence incident. Her helmet radio, still tuned to international emergency frequencies, buzzed with transmissions as various agencies attempted to coordinate their responses. Sarah could hear Stevens attempting to control the narrative through official channels, his voice carrying the authority of legitimate command as he briefed senior officers about the day's events. Ramstein operations, this is Major Stevens. Captain Chun suffered complete psychological breakdown during routine patrol mission. She has commandeered enemy aircraft and is making delusional claims about conspiracy and treason. Recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation and protective custody. But Stevens' carefully constructed narrative was already crumbling under the weight of evidence that multiple intelligence services were rapidly compiling. The German recording equipment at Bitburg had captured every radio transmission from the aerial engagement, including Sarah's broadcasts about the hidden installation and the coordinated attack by unmarked aircraft. More damaging to Stevens' credibility was the intervention by the F-22 pilot who had engaged the hostile MiGs despite explicit orders to avoid combat. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Torres had 23 years of experience and an impeccable service record that made his account of events impossible to dismiss as the fabrications of an unstable subordinate. "Sir, with respect, that's not what I observed up there." Torres' voice cut through Stevens' briefing with quiet authority. Captain Chen was under attack by hostile forces operating Russian aircraft in NATO airspace. Her tactical handling of the engagement demonstrated exceptional skill under extreme pressure. "This doesn't look like psychological breakdown to me." The contradiction between Stevens' official report and Torres' first-hand observations created immediate questions that senior commanders couldn't ignore. Within 30 minutes of Sarah's landing at Bitburg, investigative teams from multiple intelligence agencies were mobilizing to examine every aspect of the day's events. Colonel Weber returned to Sarah's aircraft accompanied by 2 men in civilian clothes whose bearing and demeanor clearly marked them as intelligence professionals. The older of the 2 introduced himself with the kind of careful courtesy that suggested significant authority, despite his unremarkable appearance. "Captain Chen, I'm Deputy Director Harrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency. This is Colonel Brennan from Air Force Special Investigations. We need to discuss the allegations you've been broadcasting and the circumstances that led to your acquisition of this aircraft." Sarah climbed down from the cockpit under careful escort, noting that the investigators' questions carried genuine interest rather than the dismissive skepticism she had expected. Harrison's reputation within the intelligence community was well known. He had built his career on exposing corruption and foreign penetration of American military systems. The debriefing took place in a secure conference room at Bitburg's operations center, with multiple recording systems capturing every word Sarah spoke. She began with the maintenance irregularities she had noticed in her F-16, detailing the subtle signs of sabotage that had been carefully disguised as routine mechanical problems. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez showed signs of stress and guilt during pre-flight inspections, Sarah explained. His maintenance logs contained inconsistencies that suggested deliberate tampering with aircraft systems. The engine failure occurred exactly as someone had wanted it to, catastrophic enough to force ejection, but delayed enough to ensure I was in the proper location. Colonel Brennan leaned forward with sharp interest. "Can you describe the specific nature of these maintenance inconsistencies?" Sarah provided technical details about fuel system modifications and electrical connection problems that would have been invisible to routine inspections, but catastrophic under operational stress. Her knowledge of aircraft systems allowed her to identify sabotage methods that most pilots would never have recognized. "The timing was too precise to be coincidental," she continued. "Multiple systems failed in sequence, creating cascade effects that made recovery impossible. Someone with intimate knowledge of F-16 systems had planned exactly how to bring down my aircraft without leaving obvious evidence of tampering." Harrison's questions focused on the hidden installation she had discovered, pressing for details about personnel, equipment, and the scope of the intelligence operation she had observed. Sarah described the joint American-Russian facility with precision that spoke to genuine first-hand observation rather than fabricated accusations. "The communications intercept equipment I observed represents capabilities that could compromise NATO operations across multiple theaters," she explained. "Real-time intelligence gathering at that level would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to hostile intelligence services. The strategic advantage would be incalculable." As Sarah's debriefing continued, parallel investigations were already underway at locations across Germany and the United States. Air Force investigators had detained Staff Sergeant Rodriguez for questioning, while intelligence analysts examined communications, intercepts, and financial records that might reveal the scope of the conspiracy. The breakthrough came when German intelligence provided surveillance footage from automated traffic cameras along the rural roads near the hidden installation. The images showed convoy movements and personnel transfers that corroborated Sarah's descriptions with devastating accuracy. More importantly, they captured clear photographs of American military vehicles and personnel at locations that officially didn't exist. Deputy Director Harrison received the preliminary investigation results through encrypted communications that brought grim satisfaction to his expression. "Captain Chen, I need to inform you that your allegations are being substantiated by independent evidence. We've identified significant financial irregularities in Major Stevens' accounts, along with communications patterns that suggest coordination with foreign intelligence services." The scope of the conspiracy was larger than Sarah had imagined. Stevens wasn't just a corrupt squadron commander. He was part of a network that included officers across multiple services and installations. The joint intelligence operation represented years of planning and coordination that had compromised American military operations throughout Europe and the Middle East. Colonel Brennan's phone buzzed with an incoming message that brought a cold smile to his features. Rodriguez just broke under questioning. He's providing detailed information about the sabotage procedures and the personnel who ordered them. Major Stevens is being taken into custody at Ramstein, along with 3 other officers identified in Rodriguez's confession. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sadness as the truth finally emerged. Her months of isolation and professional destruction had been orchestrated by people she had trusted with her life, officers who had sworn the same oaths of service that she held sacred. "There's something else," Harrison continued. "The Syria incident that damaged your reputation appears to have been manufactured to position you for elimination. Captain Webb was following orders from the same network, using fabricated intelligence to justify targeting civilian refugees. Your refusal to participate disrupted an operation designed to create international incidents that would benefit foreign intelligence services." The revelation recontextualized everything Sarah had endured, transforming her supposed professional failures into acts of moral courage that had threatened a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of military command. The full scope of the conspiracy emerged over the following 72 hours as investigators across 3 continents worked to unravel a network that had been operating for nearly 4 years. Sarah found herself at the center of the largest counterintelligence operation in NATO history, her stolen aircraft landing having triggered investigations that reached from rural German installations to the Pentagon's most classified programs. Deputy Director Harrison briefed her on developments that read like something from a Cold War thriller, except the enemy wasn't a foreign nation, but a shadow organization that transcended national boundaries in pursuit of profit and power. The joint intelligence facility she had discovered was just one node in a network that included installations in 7 countries, all funded through a complex web of defense contracts and black budget allocations. "Your Major Stevens was small fish," Harrison explained as they reviewed classified intelligence reports in Bitburg's secure facility. "He was recruited 3 years ago by Colonel Patricia Vaughn, who runs procurement operations for special access programs at the Pentagon. Vaughn has been selling operational intelligence to Russian SVR, while simultaneously providing American technology to Chinese MSS operatives." The financial scope was staggering. Vaughn's network had generated over $800 million in illegal profits through the sale of classified information, advanced weapons technology, and real-time operational intelligence that had compromised American military operations across the globe. Sarah's discovery had exposed an espionage ring that represented the worst intelligence breach in modern military history. Colonel Brennan spread satellite photographs across the conference table, showing the hidden installation she had fled from being systematically dismantled by German and American special operations teams. "We moved fast once your intelligence was verified. Captured documents show they were planning to relocate the entire operation to facilities in Belarus within the next 6 months. Your actions prevented that transition and preserved evidence that will prosecute dozens of conspirators. But the most shocking revelation concerned the broader implications of the intelligence being sold. Sarah learned that her refusal to bomb the civilian convoy in Syria hadn't just saved innocent lives. It had disrupted a carefully orchestrated false flag operation designed to justify American military intervention in regions where Vaughn's network had strategic interests. The fabricated intelligence that Webb used to target those refugees was part of a pattern, Harrison continued. Vaughn's people have been manufacturing crisis situations that require American military responses, then selling advance intelligence about those responses to hostile nations. They profit from creating the problems and then profit again from compromising the solutions. Sarah's stomach churned as she realized how many service members had died because of operations compromised by the very officers who had planned them. The conspiracy had cost hundreds of American lives while generating enormous profits for traitors who wore the same uniform she had dedicated her life to honoring. Her technical knowledge and attention to detail had provided investigators with crucial evidence about the sophistication of the intelligence operation. The equipment she had observed at the hidden facility was far more advanced than anything American intelligence agencies had suspected foreign services possessed, representing technological capabilities that could monitor and decode military communications in real time. The intercept systems you described represent a quantum leap in signals intelligence, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, a civilian analyst from the National Security Agency who had joined the investigation team. The processing power required for real-time decryption of military-grade communications suggests they had access to classified American cryptographic algorithms and hardware specifications. The source of that access became clear when investigators examined financial records and communication logs from dozens of defense contractors and government officials. Vaughn's network had systematically recruited personnel with access to the most sensitive military technologies, building a comprehensive intelligence apparatus that could compromise any American operation before it began. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy had prevented imminent disasters that would have cost thousands of lives. Intelligence analysts determined that the network was preparing to sell operational details about upcoming NATO exercises to Russian military intelligence, information that would have allowed hostile forces to position assets for devastating surprise attacks on allied forces. Your theft of that MiG and subsequent broadcasts forced them to activate emergency protocols that exposed the entire network, Harrison told her with obvious admiration. They had planned for individual arrests and security breaches, but not for someone with your combination of technical knowledge and tactical skill, creating an international incident that demanded immediate investigation. The aerial combat she had survived provided additional evidence about the scope of international cooperation within the conspiracy. Analysis of the wreckage from the MiG she had shot down revealed modifications that could only have been performed with access to classified American avionics technology. The enemy pilots had been using American-supplied targeting systems and communication equipment, creating tactical advantages that normal Russian aircraft wouldn't possess. Lieutenant Colonel Torres, the F-22 pilot who had intervened during the engagement, provided testimony that further validated Sarah's account of events. His detailed observations of the hostile aircraft behavior and weapons employment confirmed that the attackers had possessed intelligence about American fighter tactics that should have been impossible for foreign pilots to obtain. Those MiG pilots knew exactly how to exploit the engagement parameters that American fighters typically use, Torres reported during his debriefing. They weren't flying like Russian pilots using Russian tactics. They were flying like they had intimate knowledge of our procedures and capabilities. The revelation that enemy forces had been equipped with compromised American tactical doctrine represented a security breach that reached into the most classified training programs and operational procedures. Sarah's actions had exposed penetration of military systems that commanders had considered absolutely secure. As the investigation expanded, Sarah found herself working directly with senior intelligence officials who recognized that her unique perspective was crucial to understanding the full scope of what had been compromised. Her technical expertise and operational experience provided insights that traditional intelligence analysts couldn't match. General Patricia Williams, the Air Force's Director of Intelligence, flew to Bitburg personally to consult with Sarah about the implications of what she had discovered. Williams was known throughout the military as someone who had built her career on identifying and eliminating security threats, and her presence indicated the highest levels of concern about the conspiracies. Reach. Captain Chen, your actions have prevented what could have been the complete compromise of American air superiority in Europe, Williams told her during a classified briefing that included representatives from multiple intelligence agencies. The technology transfers and operational intelligence that this network was selling would have neutralized our tactical advantages for years to come. The broader investigation revealed that Sarah's survival and subsequent exposure of the conspiracy had disrupted multiple ongoing operations that would have cost billions of dollars in compromised equipment and intelligence capabilities. The hidden installation she had discovered was producing modified communication systems that allowed enemy forces to monitor American military networks in real time. Her decision to steal the MiG, rather than attempt escape on foot, had been more strategically significant than she could have imagined. The aircraft she had commandeered contained data storage systems with months of intercepted communications and tactical intelligence that investigators were using to identify additional security breaches and compromised personnel. The flight data from your stolen aircraft shows communication logs that include conversations between American field commanders and their Russian intelligence contacts, Colonel Brennan explained as he reviewed classified analysis reports. We're using that information to roll up spy networks across 3 continents. The human cost of the conspiracy was becoming clear as investigators examined compromised operations dating back 4 years. Dozens of American service members had died in attacks that succeeded because enemy forces had advanced knowledge of planned operations, troop movements, and tactical procedures. Sarah realized that her months of professional isolation and character assassination had been necessary sacrifices to expose treason that threatened the fundamental security of American military forces worldwide. Her vindication came with the sobering knowledge that her courage had prevented disasters that would have cost thousands of lives. The conspiracy she had uncovered represented the worst intelligence breach in American military history, but her actions had stopped it before irreparable damage could be done to national security and allied relationships. 6 months after Sarah's dramatic landing at Bitburg Air Base, she stood in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room, watching as the final arrests were made in what had become known as Operation Broken Trust. The wall-mounted displays showed real-time footage of coordinated raids across 12 countries, as international law enforcement agencies dismantled the largest military espionage network in modern history. Colonel Patricia Vaughn was led away from her Pentagon office in handcuffs, her 27-year military career ending in disgrace, as federal agents seized computers containing evidence of treason that would ensure life imprisonment. Major Stevens followed hours later at Ramstein, his confident swagger replaced by the hollow stare of someone who had gambled everything on a conspiracy that was now collapsing around him. Final count is 63 arrests across NATO member nations, General Williams announced to the assembled intelligence officials. Financial seizures total $940 million in assets, plus classified technology worth billions more. Captain Chen, this operation succeeded because you had the courage to act when institutional channels had been compromised. Sarah's Promotion to major had been expedited through channels that bypassed normal timelines, accompanied by decorations that recognized her extraordinary service under impossible circumstances. The Distinguished Flying Cross citation specifically mentioned her exceptional aerial combat skills while flying unfamiliar enemy aircraft in defense of American interests, while the Intelligence Star recognized her role in exposing the espionage network. But the formal recognition was less important than the fundamental changes her actions had triggered throughout the military establishment. The conspiracy she had uncovered had exposed systemic vulnerabilities in personnel security, technology protection, and operational oversight that demanded comprehensive reform at every level of command. Secretary of Defense Margaret Foster had personally selected Sarah to lead the newly established Counterintelligence Aviation Division, a specialized unit tasked with preventing future penetration of military aviation programs. The assignment represented unprecedented authority for an officer of her rank, but Foster had been adamant that traditional hierarchy was less important than proven integrity and tactical competence. Major Chen has demonstrated that technical expertise combined with moral courage can overcome even the most sophisticated threats to national security, Foster had explained during Sarah's appointment ceremony. Her new division will ensure that our aviation programs remain secure from both external and internal threats. The Counterintelligence Aviation Division operated from a classified facility outside Washington, where Sarah now supervised teams of investigators, analysts, and technical specialists who examined every aspect of military aviation security. Her unique combination of pilot experience and intelligence analysis skills made her perfectly suited to identify vulnerabilities that traditional security reviews might miss. Her first major initiative involved comprehensive review of maintenance procedures and personnel security at every American airbase worldwide. The protocols that had allowed Rodriguez to sabotage her F-16 were systematically eliminated through new oversight systems that made unauthorized aircraft modifications virtually impossible. We're implementing quantum-encrypted maintenance logs that create permanent records of every action performed on military aircraft, Sarah explained during a classified briefing to senior Air Force leadership. Any attempt to alter those records will trigger immediate investigation and forensic analysis that can identify sabotage attempts within hours rather than months. The technologies her division developed went far beyond simple maintenance oversight. Sarah's team created advanced monitoring systems that could detect anomalous behavior patterns in military personnel, identifying potential security risks before they could compromise critical operations. Lieutenant Colonel Torres, who had risked his career to defend Sarah during the aerial engagement, now served as her deputy commander in the new division. His intervention had been recognized with promotion and assignment to the unit that was revolutionizing military security practices. The F-22 pilots who witnessed that engagement understand what really happened up there, Torres told her during one of their strategic planning sessions. Your flying skills and tactical decisions under extreme pressure have become legendary. Throughout the fighter pilot community, every pilot in the Air Force knows that you saved lives while flying a stolen enemy aircraft. The ripple effects of Sarah's actions extended far beyond American military circles. NATO had implemented new intelligence sharing protocols that made infiltration by hostile networks significantly more difficult, while allied nations had upgraded their own security procedures based on lessons learned from Operation Broken Trust. Her testimony before congressional intelligence committees had been classified at the highest levels, but selected details had been released to demonstrate the scope of the threat that had been neutralized. Sarah's account of discovering the joint American-Russian intelligence facility had shocked lawmakers into approving massive increases in counterintelligence funding and oversight authority. The investigation had revealed that over 200 American service members had died in operations compromised by Vaughn's network, their deaths caused by intelligence sold to enemy forces for profit. Sarah's actions had prevented thousands of additional casualties by disrupting planned operations that would have been catastrophically compromised. Dr. Martinez from the National Security Agency had joined Sarah's division as chief technical analyst, bringing expertise in signals intelligence that complemented Sarah's operational background. Together, they were developing revolutionary approaches to protecting military communications from the kind of real-time interception that the conspiracy had employed. The quantum encryption protocols we're implementing will make it impossible for hostile forces to decode military communications, even if they possess our equipment and algorithms, Martinez explained during a technology demonstration. Major Chun's insights about operational security have been crucial to designing systems that protect information at every level of the command structure. Sarah's reputation within the international intelligence community had grown to legendary status among professionals who understood the true scope of what she had accomplished. Foreign intelligence services regularly requested consultations about their own security vulnerabilities, recognizing that her unique experience provided insights unavailable through traditional channels. The personal cost of her ordeal had been significant, but Sarah found unexpected fulfillment in her new role as someone who could prevent others from experiencing the isolation and betrayal she had endured. Her division actively recruited officers who had faced discrimination or professional retaliation, creating an organization where moral courage was valued above political conformity. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to the maintenance sergeant who had sabotaged Sarah's aircraft, was among the first female pilots assigned to the division after experiencing harassment that had nearly ended her career. Sarah's mentorship and support had enabled Rodriguez to develop innovative security protocols that were being implemented throughout the military aviation community. Major Chun proved that standing up for what's right is worth any professional cost, Rodriguez reflected during a team meeting. Her example shows that individual integrity can overcome institutional corruption, even when the odds seem impossible. The stolen MiG-29 that had carried Sarah to safety had been thoroughly analyzed by American engineers, who discovered modifications that revealed the extent of technology transfer within Vaughn's network. The aircraft now sat in a classified research facility where Sarah's division used it to train investigators in recognizing compromised enemy equipment. Her final report on Operation Broken Trust had been distributed to intelligence agencies throughout NATO, providing a comprehensive analysis of how the conspiracy had operated and recommendations for preventing similar penetrations in the future. The document had become required reading for senior officers responsible for operational security. As Sarah stood in her division's command center, monitoring security operations across 3 continents, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from isolation and professional destruction to leadership of one of the military's most critical security initiatives. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy her had instead revealed her true potential as someone who could protect American interests at the highest levels. Her radio crackled with reports from field teams conducting security inspections at bases worldwide, their findings contributing to a comprehensive picture of military aviation security that would protect countless lives in future operations. Sarah Chen had found her true calling as guardian of the institution she had sworn to serve, ensuring that betrayal like Vaughn's network could never again threaten American service members. The girl who had been dismissed as psychologically unstable was now one of the most trusted officers in American military intelligence, her courage having transformed not just her own career, but the fundamental security of military aviation worldwide. 2 years later, Sarah stood before an auditorium filled with newly commissioned Air Force officers at the Air Force Academy, her uniform bearing insignia that few people outside the intelligence community would recognize. The silver eagles on her shoulders marked her recent promotion to colonel, an advancement that had shattered traditional timelines but reflected the extraordinary value of her contributions to national security. Behind her on the massive screen was a declassified satellite image of the hidden installation she had discovered in Germany, now converted into a NATO training facility where intelligence specialists learn to identify and counter foreign penetration operations. What had once been a center of treason was now a symbol of institutional resilience and reform. 3 years ago, I was considered a failed pilot with questionable judgment, Sarah told the assembled cadets, her voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect auditorium. Today, I command operations that protect every American service member deployed overseas. The difference wasn't a change in my abilities. It was the courage to act on my convictions when everything seemed hopeless. In the front row sat Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, the former captain who had joined Sarah's division and was now preparing to assume command of the Counterintelligence Aviation Division's European operations. Her success represented the multiplication effect of Sarah's leadership, creating a new generation of officers who understood that technical competence and moral courage were equally essential. Your careers will present moments when following orders conflicts with doing what's right, Sarah continued, making eye contact with individual cadets scattered throughout the audience. The easy choice is to comply with authority and avoid personal risk. The harder choice is to accept responsibility for consequences that extend beyond your immediate situation. The cadets listened with rapt attention as Sarah described the investigation techniques her division had developed, the international cooperation that now protected classified technologies, and the ongoing operations that prevented hostile penetration of American military systems. Her work had evolved from exposing a single conspiracy to creating permanent safeguards against institutional corruption. Recent intelligence reports indicated that foreign services had abandoned attempts to recruit American military personnel in favor of less risky espionage methods, recognizing that Sarah's security protocols made infiltration extremely difficult and discovery nearly inevitable. The deterrent effect of Operation Broken Trust continued to protect American interests years after the final arrests. Excellence in any field requires more than technical knowledge, Sarah explained as she concluded her presentation. It requires the wisdom to know when rules serve their intended purpose and when they become obstacles to achieving larger objectives. That distinction can only be made by people who understand both their professional responsibilities and their moral obligations. After the formal presentation, Sarah participated in a smaller discussion session where cadets could ask detailed questions about career development and leadership challenges. One particularly insightful cadet asked about the psychological toll of operating outside normal support systems during her ordeal. Isolation was the most difficult aspect, Sarah admitted. When everyone around you suggests that you're wrong, maintaining confidence in your own judgment requires extraordinary mental strength. But that's exactly when your judgment is most important, when conventional wisdom has been compromised by factors that others can't or won't acknowledge. The session concluded with Sarah's announcement of the Academy's new Aviation Security Scholarship Program. Funded by assets seized during Operation Broken Trust, the scholarships would support cadets who demonstrated both technical excellence and ethical leadership, ensuring that future military aviators possess the skills necessary to protect American interests against increasingly sophisticated threats. As Sarah departed the Academy that evening, she received a secure communication from General Williams, reporting successful completion of another counterintelligence operation that had prevented the theft of hypersonic weapons technology. The techniques Sarah's division had developed were now protecting America's most advanced military programs from espionage attempts that would have been undetectable just a few years earlier. Her journey from isolated observer to national security leader had demonstrated that individual courage could transform institutional cultures when supported by competence and persistence. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy her had instead revealed capabilities that made her indispensable to protecting American military superiority. The young pilot who had once been dismissed as psychologically unstable now commanded resources and authority that reached across every branch of military service, her influence extending to allied nations and international security organizations. Sarah Chen had not just proven her worth, she had redefined what it meant to serve with distinction in an era of evolving threats. What started as a fight for personal vindication had become a mission to protect every service member who trusted their lives to institutions that Sarah's work had made more worthy of that trust. If this incredible story of courage, betrayal, and ultimate triumph inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We share amazing real-life stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered most. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you want to see more incredible military stories that prove heroes walk among us every day.